Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. This is your host, Dwight, here to talk about an exciting documentary, one that I just watched and found completely moving, and also, and obviously this is on purpose, but very, very poignant for the times. I think obviously we'll get into talking about that. But the movie is My Omaha. And I am joined here by the director and creator of the film, Nick Beaulieu. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Dwight. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm real excited to do it. It's I'm going to say important. I know people throw that around with things, but this is an important movie. It touches on so many things, not the least of which is interpersonal relationships. But I'm going to read the little description that I have here, which is, and we can build off this. It's the IMDb description, actually. So I'll see. Maybe you had a hand in it or someone on your team did.
Yeah, it should be accurate, I hope.
After graduating from journalism school, Nick Beaulieu returns to his hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, to document its surging racial justice movement while seeking to reconnect with his staunchly pro-Trump father, Randy. A task made more urgent when Randy is unexpectedly diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, a process that was very, very tender in the way that you were able to share that. And I'm, looking forward to talking with you about that as well. But so that is the thing. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what launched you into this particular project?
Sure. So, I grew up in Omaha. I know the city intimately well, went to school there. Really, is all I knew as a kid. And one of the things that is sort of just accepted reality in Omaha when you're growing up is that it's a very racially segregated place. People had talked about, the West Omaha suburban community was like the white Omaha, which is where I grew up. North Omaha was a black community. South Omaha was the Latino community and the immigrant community. And, it wasn't until I got into college and got a little older that I started to, kind of question why this was the way it was. I grew up with very little kind of diversity in my schools and just with my friendships and things like that. And that changed in college. So this kind of discovery also coincided with, a pretty turbulent political time. It was when Trump was running for office for the first time. It's when the Black Lives Matter movement had kind of started to spread around the country, and there were protests happening in Nebraska at a size that I had never really seen before. So there was like this personal interest that coincided with these national forces that were happening. And so I decided, that I wanted to try to tell some kind of story about this. And I came from a journalism background, but wanted to pivot into film. And so I just got a camera and started meeting people around town and filming. And, lo and behold, 8 years later, here we are with a movie. At that age, I didn't think it was going to take that long or become what it did, but that's how it all started.
Yeah. You talk about in the beginning on camera and while you're filming that you are acquainting yourself with the process and with the camera even as you're going, right? Kind of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, because my background was in like print journalism and like online media, I really had no production experience. So, I was like in real time learning how to operate a camera, learning how to do all these technical things. We show some of that in the movie for kind of comedic effect, but it was true. I didn't have the budget to like hire professionals a lot of times, so it was all self-taught, and I think that adds to the charm of the film, but also like letting people know just how intimate the whole thing was too, I think is helpful for people to get into it.
It was, as a viewer anyway, as I was watching that, it really spoke to the nature of what you were doing. I really felt this hometown feel that this meant something to you personally, your affection for the area. Did you know going into it that this was going to be I'm and correct me if it's wrong to say it this way, but a dual message in here. There's the social issues, and then also the very very compelling and interesting experience of having this divide in your relationship with your dad. Did you know that those were both going to be in there?
From the beginning, I really was I only saw it as a social issues film, and I intended actually to take an objective approach or a journalistic approach and to actually not have any personal angle at all. Um, where I decided to pivot was actually kind of halfway through. It was that there were sort of two things that impacted that choice. The first was um, talking with people, getting feedback on the film, and also just like assessing the changing culture and the changing landscape. I was thinking like a lot about what it meant to be a white filmmaker that was taking on this type of topic, and I wanted to make a film that made sense from my perspective, because no matter how objective you try to be, everyone has a point of view when they make a film. And so that was one motivation. And the second one was this kind of undeniable realization that as I was continuing to do this work, I was only drifting farther and farther away from some of the conservative members of my family, in particular my dad, to the point where this project that was taking up most of my time, I couldn't even talk about it back at home. And I thought to myself, well, how interesting would it be if I could actually explore that reality and help give the film a broader perspective. um, it just so happened that right around that time is also when he was diagnosed, and so that was a sign for me to be like, okay, now really you should embrace this, because it's also an opportunity to reconnect. So yeah, it started out as something completely different than what it turned out to be, but ultimately I was happy in the sense that I think we landed in a place that blends these two ideas together
Hmm.
well.
Well, and when we look at these kinds of differences now, and I think especially when people are talking about it in snapshots, and whether it's a fictional depiction or whether it's people talking about it in social media or just some of these differences and divides, um, the realism of the relationship at question is there. And you start out by talking about the relationship that you and your dad have had over the time. You guys have been very very close.
Yeah, I mean, I think that adds to the kind of heightened sense of tragedy about the whole thing, is that he was such a great dad throughout my childhood, and we did have a tight bond. I mean, I was the oldest child in my family, and that plays a big role, I think, in that, I was given some kind of the kind of special treatment the first child gets in certain cases, right? Um, and and yet, there was a fracture that happened because of politics. I mean, um, I think about, there's a scene in the film where um, I read like a Christmas letter that my dad had written me, and it really just reflects how important the issues were to him, and therefore like I think lets people know why politics was such a barrier for us, because it wasn't just like stuff we talked about in passing. It was like critical to like our identities,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it only made it more hard with the fact that he was such an active and involved parent for me.
Well, and I think that for those of us who are on that side of things, that we look at, well, let me back up a little. I hear people nowadays saying things like, how could you trash a relationship over politics? Something is whatever as politics. And there's so much morality that is wrapped into politics that I've always thought that was kind of a weird statement, because that is something that's about your ethics and morality. But particularly today, and I think when we're looking at issues of social justice, to have someone, especially someone that we love, and especially someone who we know is a good person, to say, yeah, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in inequality, or in this case, even just being a Trump supporter, even whether or not, anyway, but yeah, just that kind of thing, and how that and the movement that has gone along with Trump is something that so many of us look at and find I can't find anything to identify with why someone would like this guy, or like what he is all about. Um, and so it divides, and people can't talk about it very often. Um, how did you kind of approach that with him? It seemed to me that he perhaps was a little uncomfortable with being in the documentary at first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it was trial and error of trying to figure out, okay, um, how could we kind of get past the noise of like the like arguing about the issues and get to like the deeper stuff?
Hmm.
And I think what got what got us there was when I asked him, how does this make you feel that we're like this, like asking like a real meta question. And it's when he answered, he said, it makes me feel like you don't respect my intelligence. And it was for the first time after we started filming, something new actually clicked in my head, and I thought, you know what, I never saw it that way. I never thought about how my own choices when it comes to like, the beliefs and the stances that I choose to have, um, that my dad could take that so personally as a rejection.
Hmm.
And what that did was, it didn't make me want to change my opinions or my stances or values, but it did give me more empathy for why it made him so emotional. And that actually helped us um see where each other were coming from better. I mean, it definitely helped me,
Hmm.
because I wasn't like, I realized that, okay, this isn't just because he thinks he knows what's right. It's also because he feels he's like taking it on response, like a responsibility of sorts. And, it's complicated because it's like, you can only be responsible for yourself. You can't take on that weight, but it did make me more empathetic. And as a result, we were able to, I think, listen to each other a lot better after we had that kind of chat.
Did you guys talk about it before you made the film? Or did you just avoid the subjects, or did you fight, or what was it like?
We certainly argued a lot. I don't think we really had a frank conversation that addressed the divide. Um, it was a lot of just arguing on a issue by issue basis. Um, and honestly, it was a lot of not talking. It was like there was a good couple years in between when he got sick and when I graduated where we just went long stretches without really talking to each other much. And it was really, I think, an avoidance because of what we both knew were the, you know, issues. And so it took it took the cancer for us to like approach this head on. And then it was the camera that helped us, that forced us really to get super honest, because when you sit down in front of that, I think it helps you go places you otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, it did seem like the idea of being listened to, I think, um, it makes us, it makes us be able to trust the other person more to be vulnerable. And when we are vulnerable, if that vulnerability is rewarded by the other person, that can make a big, big difference versus the other option, which is somebody just shooting it down and being like, which it seemed like there was some of, as far as that went. I couldn't help but noticing, and I was curious about this because I think a lot of people run into this, especially with parents. There's a power differential that stays there for a while to where it's like, well, we disagree because you won't listen to me and I'm right. You know, that was lingering. That what I believe is the truth, what you believe is wrong, and we can talk about it respectfully, but it has to be within that framework. And it seemed like maybe you guys were able to transcend that boundary a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit.
Yeah, I mean, um, it kind of boiled down to like reaching a place of acceptance, I think, about where the other person was. I think that's what makes the whole story so universal is that it's our story is not unique in that there are so many people in this country that have this divide, and it's specifically along a generational line, you know, of people in my dad's age group who, you know, have a certain kind of worldview really defined by the media that they consume, and then their children that have a totally different one, you know. And so um you know, when we premiered last week, I mean, so many people that saw it came up to me, and the most common thing I heard was how it hit very close to home for people because it's like such a common issue. Um, so yeah, and I think that it's weird that the cancer is what helped us actually, I think, break through it a little bit farther. And you know, it's unfortunate because of what that cost came at. You know, I mean, is you know, it cost my dad his life, but had he not gotten sick, like it's very kind of hard to actually imagine how much progress we might have been able to make. I hope we would have, but it's just hard to say.
Hmm. I particularly enjoyed the part where he was sort of interviewing you. You guys switched around. It was in the field with horses. I take it his, um,
Yeah.
and he wanted to ask you questions, and that opened up into things that were, as you put it, more meta or more deep in your own personal relationships as he's relating to you. First of all, I appreciated that you left that in there because that's very personal. Um, and I was curious, was there any difficulty either with that or any other things as far as when you were, I was just bawling watching it. He's not even my dad, right? I was relating to it as a son and a father, both, and so it was very very heavy. And you're editing and trying to decide which things to include and share with the world. How was that?
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. You know, with that one, I really wanted to make sure that viewers saw that we were having a kind of mutual exchange, you know, that I wasn't just like, you know, calling all the shots when it came to having these interviews and these conversations. And so, you know, in real life, when my dad asked if he could interview me, I jumped at that, you know. Um, I think what's like so interesting about like the editing of a documentary is that we in that interview, in that scene, we probably talked for 2 hours and you see, you know, 3 minutes of it.
Yeah,
We talked about all kinds of stuff, but I thought it was important that we showed what the most important thing was to my dad in that moment in time, which was him kind of getting some of this stuff off of his chest about our history in our with our family and in our relationship, and like that is so intertwined when it comes to the political differences. Like anytime you have a complicated relationship with someone, it's like you can't just isolate all these things, you know, they're all together. So in order for us to continue getting closer, like that was another thing that needed to get addressed. And so I thought that it showed a lot of self-reflection and humility on the part of my dad, and just courage to be apologetic about it. And so you know, I mean, it's interesting you bring that up because when we first premiered, that scene and the scene after is actually what kind of had brought some tears back to me, and I've become so like detached from the film having watched it so
sure.
many times. But that one kind of got to me again, having seen it with a crowd and just detecting that honesty. It moved me again.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was curious as well about your inclusion of the interview you had with his friend, Ghost, I believe was his name. And I don't know if this was someone that you knew. Had you ever met before, or this is just someone he talked about?
Yeah, I had never met Ghost. My dad had brought him up before in passing, and it was actually through reviewing footage where my dad brought him up that I thought, I should reach out to this guy, and just see if he has anything interesting to say. He was this sort of mysterious figure in my head before I got to know him. This guy named Ghost who, was Native American and had served time in prison. It was just like interesting. So I called him, and the phone call is it's in the film as we go to visit him. He was so emotional about my dad that I just knew instinctually that I needed to go talk to him. And I'd always kind of felt like we needed one more kind of beat when it came to my dad and I's story. So I went there not knowing what to expect, and you know got a great scene out of it. But more importantly, just for me, it was so healing as a person to hear those stories and to get to know them, and spent several days with them. And they, my dad had made such an impact on their lives, that it was really helpful in how I kind of grieved his loss, getting to know them. So it meant a lot that we were able to include that in the film, and
Yeah.
in a way that helps wrap up the story.
It was interesting to hear him talking about his time getting out of prison and how your dad was there as like this pillar in his life, non-judgmental, helping him out, and I appreciated that vision of someone once again to show that there's different facets to someone's life. But was it? I was curious, and you mentioned it being healing, but what were your thoughts about hearing about your dad in that way? Was it? Um, and I don't know anything about your dad other times. What was it like? Oh, of course, or were
Yeah.
there new was there new information or new kind of characteristics you found out about him?
Well, I would say, it wasn't surprising. I knew my dad was capable of, really deep compassion and generosity, and he was always a really good friend to people. That became apparent during his cancer journey because of so many people that just showed up for him. Um, I think what it was more than anything was just a really strong reminder of those things. I mean, um, especially like when going back to just the kind of picture you paint of someone in your head when you're fighting with them or when you have disagreements with them. You forget about their better angles, and like the whole scope of them. And that's really why it's in the film, is to show that, like, no matter how much you might disagree with someone or you might think their views are problematic, um everyone is human, and also like everyone has the capacity to be good and to do really powerful things for other people. So for me, it was not a surprise, but it was a really important reminder about who my dad was.
Yeah. You talked to a lot of people about the concept of changing minds, particularly as you were looking at the racial divide, and you were talking to a lot of community leaders about that. Um, what kinds of things did you glean from that and learning about this? And I should say, your dad even came with you to one of the meetings, the community meetings as well. But yeah, what did you find out, or see and learn about that as that work was going on?
I think the biggest thing I learned was that, you can't get hung up on trying to change anyone else's mind except your own. uh, I filmed so many events like that in the city, and also went to a lot that I just didn't even film. Everything from town halls to city meetings to just smaller community gatherings. I mean, the best part about it all is the relationships that you build, and getting to know people that aren't like you. That to me has always stuck with me much more than any sort of like takeaway from a conversation that we had, or like any kind of presentation that I witnessed. It was more about like seeing the same people all the time,
Mhm.
getting to know them, and everyone kind of recognizing this mutual goal of wanting a better Omaha, you know. So, that was what was and that's what stuck with me, I suppose, is that kind of work, the value in it is the people that you get to know and what you can do together rather than, having some kind of mission to go and change people's minds.
Yeah, I wrote down something. It was one of the people that you were interviewing and talking to said that the only way to change the world is through, if I got it right here, experience and relationships, um,
Mhm.
which goes right along with that. You mentioned earlier the concept and the issue of being white and telling this story, and it looked like you record some of that as far as asking people about it, but can you tell people a little bit more about that? What did you learn about being a white man telling a racial equity story?
Yeah, I think what ended up being the most helpful was leaning on the people in the film that I was working with, on that topic, and particularly in this case with Leo, the other main activist, and kind of like on and off camera asking him like, what do you think about this? Do you think that this makes sense? Like, what direction do you think we should go? Just being super transparent and open and honest about that. What was really tough for me was that I had done all this time documenting stories around North Omaha, and I did not want to leave those people behind and abandon those stories simply because of you know a kind of perspective change, of taking things personal. So I looked at that as a challenge of, okay, well, how can I find a way to make both of these things work in a way that's authentic and responsible and for the greater good, and so I would not have been able to do it by myself. I mean, there was a lot of people that I had watch cuts and watch scenes and get feedback. I was on the board of an organization for several years called Movement in Omaha for Racial Equity. Um, the founder of that is Ajamal Binden, who's in the film. He was the guy who moderated the events at the church. And, I learned a lot about racial justice and racial equity work um, through that organization and through meeting with Ajamal a lot. Cynthia as well, for all the work that she did. I don't think it's ever a perfect endeavor. I mean, it's a sensitive situation, and what I try to do is be extremely transparent about who I am and what my perspective was, and that what you see is only my lens, and hopefully people can buy into that. But I understand that it is a really tricky subject.
Yeah. It was an interesting message that you amplified through one part. And I don't remember if this was Leo or another person they were quoting Malcolm X and talking about the importance of white people educating white people that racism is fundamentally a white problem because that's how it's perpetuated.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up because I think more than anything, that is sort of like the sort of rationale having for telling this story in the way that we did, was embracing that specific message that Leo gave me, um, because that's really kind of like the domino that starts the real story of the film, which is trying to have conversations about racism with your loved ones, right? And then from there, also seeing how those conversations play out in other parts of the city and so on. So, yeah, I from when it comes to that side of the story, I hope that is what the biggest takeaway is for people. Is that if you're white and you care about racial justice issues, like that's sort of your job, is to talk with other white people about the issues. So I tried to reflect that in the film and in our journey as much as possible.
Having been through now, would you say 8 years of going through all of this? What do you think how do you think, I should say, that it's affected you? How do you feel? Do you feel like obviously new perspectives, but has it changed you at all?
Wow. Yeah, it certainly has. I mean, I kind of grew up making the film in a sense. I mean, it was like kind of my entire 20s. So
Yeah.
I changed a lot. I certainly saw myself mature a lot and become less naive about a lot of things. Um, yeah, I mean, could probably spend the rest of the podcast describing how much I've
Sure.
changed from the guy who started the film to the guy who ended it. But um, I think if the one thing I guess to key in on was it was just very humbling. The whole thing was extremely humbling. It was humbling, kind of getting to know all the people I get to know in the film and like the lessons I learned from them, including my dad. Going from a place of thinking I kind of had these answers and realizing it was more complicated than I thought. Um, and it was humbling learning how difficult it is to make a movie. I didn't set out to make an 8-year project. I set out to um, on something I thought would take a lot less time than that, and just sort of like kept fighting and found a way. So it was humbling, and I guess I also did discover that I did have a sort of knack for persevering through the challenges that come with making a film. There were definitely a lot of times where we could have exited, this thing and not have finished it, but very proud that I did, and that has given me a lot of confidence when it comes to making the next thing. Is that okay? You were able to really create something from nothing and it's making an impact on people. Like I didn't have anything like that before, so
Mhm.
um that is something that's been a great takeaway, just personally from the whole experience.
What kind of stories do you want to tell? From
A lot, yeah, a lot. I mean, there's a lot of different things that I find super curious that I would like to dive into. I mean, I'm always just interested in anything about the human condition. So um there's stories of, there's other social issue stories that catch my eye. There's um other personal stories that I could see myself telling, now that I've done a personal autobiographical thing. Um I still write, consider myself a writer, so it's been fun since finishing this film, getting back into that world a little bit, creative writing and just seeing kind of what is like coming to my mind. So, um, yeah, I don't have like something I can necessarily speak to right now, but I have so many ideas germinating in my head that I'm
yeah,
excited to bring into the world.
yeah, yeah. It's a lot of yourself, that you really showed here, and some elements of it that are just very vulnerable, and I think it tells a story once again that I think people can really benefit from seeing and experiencing, both from the standpoint. And this was what hit me too, is that you presented it didn't become a story about just one thing, and that could have very easily leaned too far into one. I was curious though, how did you balance out what to leave in with your two big themes, and how to maintain a balance between the story of you and your dad versus the racial injustice and equality?
Yeah, I mean, it was the hardest part of the film was balancing these two strands. And I have to give all the credit to the different editors that we worked with. I mean, it all worked through the editing. I mean, very early on, we knew what our kind of core story blocks were because there was just significant things that happened. Um, but just because you have those, like, you can't just put them together and assume that they will work. There's a lot of massaging and nuance that has to be introduced so that things flow and that things feel interconnected. So, we edited for like about 2 years off and on, and I worked with several different people. The editors I worked on it with were Summers Henderson and Jordan Montminy. And the person I really want to shout out is Maeve O'Boyle, who was our consulting editor. And through working with Maeve, we were really able to take it from a pretty rough state into essentially the first version of what you see now. And it was through, her just incredible talent and skill for weaving together multiple story strands, for helping me, kind of craft my voiceover in the certain notes that she gave. She introduced music in a way that we had not been really using music yet. She also pushed me to get some new shots and some pickups and additional interviews and ways that help tie everything together. So um, I guess to make a long story short, it was really in the editing, and it was really through the expertise of a lot of other people uh, that have a lot of experience that helped us out. And I have to give a shout out to Doug Block, my producer as well, who introduced me to Maeve and also played a key creative role in that as well. Several other people too. I mean, I don't want to leave anyone out, but John Kay was a creative consultant I worked with in Omaha, and another person that was pretty involved that helped me get to where I was too.
Well, once again, the movie is My Omaha. Where can people see this? Is it out streaming or is it coming?
Yeah, hopefully it's coming soon. We just had our first world premiere in Los Angeles at the Slam Dance Film Festival. Um, we are working on our next festival premiere and other festivals to come from there. Working on trying to organize our local premiere in Omaha, and then we have big plans to get this to different places like churches and other community organizations, and hopefully in people's homes as well. So we're kind of at the very beginning of that. Hoping I'll have more news soon, and when I do, I can share that with you, and the listeners
Oh,
can
wonderful.
hopefully.
Yeah, I'd love to put that out when it is. It's yeah, going through the festival circuit. That's going to be what will that be like? Do you anticipate for you to do the big Omaha unveiling?
Oh, I can't wait for it. I mean, you know, just because like there's certain things in the film that were like hit different if you're from Omaha. Like and I'm I'm so excited for that experience to watch it with people because you know I know what those things are because from Omaha too, So really excited for that. I mean, it's always nervous when you have a hometown screening about something about your hometown. You hope that you get accepted, but in the select kind of showings we've done with individuals, we feel like people are gonna like it. So yeah, can't wait for that. I'm just anxious to get it nailed down, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Well, I'd encourage people to keep an eye on this and to see when it does come out. I'm excited to see which kinds of things that you do next and when this is out. Yeah, I definitely recommend that people do it. And I wanted to take a minute to thank you as well. I mean, just for making it and for sharing it, because I think it's going to make a big difference in people when they do see it. So, where can people follow you? Is there a place that they can follow? I mean, either the film's progress or your work in general.
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. Our film handle is My Omaha Film. And my handle is my first name dot last name, so Nick Beaulieu on Instagram. So yeah, we're posting updates there. And if anyone is an artist or filmmaker and wants to engage, they can reach me on there too, and I'd love to connect and see other people's work. So yeah, thank you for the really kind words. It's really nice to talk about the movie.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.